Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale unfolds with lessons, challenges, and the power of transformation. Today's story is about Ethan Walker, a successful millionaire who seemingly had everything: wealth, power, and influence. But behind the facade of luxury and success, he was struggling with an emptiness he couldn't ignore. When a bold challenge forces him to marry a woman who is everything he's not used to, Ethan embarks on a journey of self-discovery and change that will reshape his life forever. Join us as we explore this powerful story of love, growth, and redemption. Be sure to subscribe to begin today's story. Ethan Walker had everything: wealth, power, influence, more than most people could ever dream of. As I watched him, standing at the heart of that lavish celebration, it was clear to anyone with eyes that he was the man everyone wanted to be. He commanded the room in ways that most could only fantasize about. The clinking of crystal glasses, the scent of imported cigars hanging thick in the air, the laughter of those in his circle, all of it was a spectacle of success. As the billionaire real estate mogul, his name graced the covers of business magazines, his real estate empire expanding with each acquisition. Deals worth millions were merely routine for him now, a game he had mastered over the years. His power was palpable, and so was the admiration that seemed to swirl around him. People sought him out, revered him for his achievements, and even his friends couldn't help but marvel at the life he had built. Ethan was, without question, the epitome of success. But if you could look beyond the surface, you'd realize something that the rest of the world seemed blind to. For all his accomplishments, Ethan was not happy. It wasn't something you could easily spot at first glance. But if you paid attention, the cracks were there, subtle but undeniable. Beneath that cool exterior, the man who had everything also felt the weight of nothingness. His life, despite all the trophies it bore, was increasingly empty. You see, success in Ethan's world was nothing more than a predictable script. Ambitious business deals, flawless women on his arm, and social gatherings that never seemed to end. Each day was filled with meticulously planned meetings, calculated moves, and a constant reaffirmation of his place at the top. But after years of living in the bubble he had created, Ethan began to feel the monotony creeping in. The deals no longer thrilled him. The women, though beautiful and sophisticated, seemed like mere accessories, part of a routine he could no longer bear. The wealth, once his driving force, was now just a number on a spreadsheet. I had known Ethan for years. We were friends, or at least, that's how I thought of it. We had shared countless conversations, most of which revolved around our respective businesses. As a businessman, I could read him like an open book. He had always been so focused on conquering everything around him. Whether it was a new acquisition, a luxury car, or the latest fashion, but it was that focus, that drive, that I began to see as his greatest weakness. Despite all his accomplishments, Ethan had never really faced a challenge that tested him as a person. Sure, he was challenged in business. But in life, when it came to the things that mattered, he had coasted through. He had never had to face a situation where his wealth and charm couldn't simply get him what he wanted. That was when the idea came to me. It hit me between sips of aged whiskey one evening as we sat together at a bar. I was tired of watching him coast through life, ticking off accomplishments one after another without any real growth. I wanted to push him, to make him uncomfortable. I wanted him to face something real. So, I proposed a bet, but not just any bet, a challenge that would make him face something he could not control with money or power. Ethan, I said, what if I told you that for the next 6 months, you have to marry someone completely different from your usual type? No prenup, no financial benefits, just a real marriage, no perks, no guarantees. At first, Ethan laughed it off. What kind of bet is that? He mocked. He thought it was absurd. And honestly, so did I. But I pushed him. I could see the spark in his eyes flicker as I teased him, calling him predictable, too used to winning through charm, money, and sheer influence. You think you can conquer anything, I continued, but you're stuck in a cycle. Ethan, you've never been challenged in a way that really forces you to confront yourself. That hit a nerve. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't like the idea that he might be seen as predictable. That he might have reached the point where everything he did was easy. And just like that, the challenge became something he couldn't resist. He asked me who the woman would be. I smiled and told him it would be my sister, Emma Miller. When I said her name, his reaction was exactly what I expected. His brow furrowed, a skeptical smirk playing at the corners of his lips. Emma? I could tell he was trying to process what kind of woman she could possibly be. She wasn't like the women Ethan typically surrounded himself with, glamorous, polished, and effortlessly beautiful. No, Emma was everything Ethan wasn't used to. She was an academic, an activist, and someone who avoided the luxury lifestyle he so adored. Her world didn't revolve around status or money. And, to be honest, Emma wasn't the kind of woman who would catch anyone's eye in the traditional sense. She was often described as unattractive by the society that Ethan thrived in. Her face was sharp, lacking delicate features, and her body didn't fit the idealized beauty standard of the elite circles Ethan moved in. She dressed simply and purposefully, never trying to attract attention. Emma wasn't about playing the game of appearances. That was why she was perfect for the challenge. Ethan didn't understand why I would choose someone like her. But then, that was the point. He needed to face a real challenge, something that money and power couldn't simply buy. Emma despised everything Ethan represented: excessive wealth, corporate power, and the endless pursuit of superficial status. The idea of her marrying Ethan was laughable, almost unthinkable. But for Ethan, saying no would be admitting that he couldn't win. And Ethan never admitted defeat. Not to anyone. So, with alcohol fueling his arrogance and pride bruised by the challenge, he accepted the bet. And just like that, I set the wheels in motion. Ethan Walker, the man who had everything, would marry my sister, a woman who, by his standards, was everything he could never have. The morning after Ethan had accepted the challenge, he arrived at his office, already buzzing with the anticipation of what was to come. He wasted no time, directing his assistant to arrange a meeting with Emma. No explanation was given. He simply ordered that she be brought in. Ethan's mind was already racing with what he would say to her. He could already picture her reaction: resentment, confusion, perhaps even outright disdain. Emma was far from the type of woman who would be swayed by wealth or charm. If anything, the very thought of her being part of Ethan's world felt like a mismatch, a defiance of everything he stood for. I could see that Ethan was used to having his way. He had always been a man of control. Each move in his life was calculated. Nothing was left to chance. But I could tell that there was something different this time. He wasn't just dealing with business or power dynamics. This was something deeper. He was stepping into a realm where neither money nor influence would mean a thing. When Emma arrived at his office, I knew it would be a test for Ethan. I watched from the corner of the room as she stepped through the door. She wasn't dressed in anything extravagant. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. And she wore a simple outfit, a contrast to the designer suits that Ethan and his world were accustomed to. Her appearance was understated, but there was an undeniable presence about her. She had a quiet strength that Ethan hadn't expected. Emma didn't seem at all concerned with the luxurious surroundings. She didn't glance at the velvet couches or the intricate artwork on the walls. Instead, her eyes met Ethan's with a calmness that unsettled him. As she waited in his office, she did something that Ethan had never seen before. She didn't fidget with her phone or nervously glance around. Instead, she pulled out a book from her bag and started reading, completely indifferent to the delayed meeting. Ethan, watching this through the surveillance cameras, was initially taken aback by her calm composure. Most women he encountered would have shown impatience or discomfort in the face of such a delay. But not Emma. She simply continued reading, unaffected by the power games he was playing. After a long, uncomfortable 40 minutes, Ethan finally summoned her into the office. Emma didn't hesitate. She stood up, walked into the room, and stopped in front of his desk with a straightforward, almost bored expression. There was no trace of nervousness or anticipation in her demeanor. Her eyes scanned Ethan, not with admiration, but with a cool, almost dismissive appraisal. Ethan was the kind of man who had always been admired, coveted, and adored. Yet, here she was, completely indifferent to his presence. With a slightly forced smile, Ethan began to explain the terms of the bet. He told her about the 6-month marriage, the lack of financial benefits, and the lack of any prenuptial agreement. Most women, had they been presented with such an absurd proposition, would have reacted with shock, outrage, or perhaps laughter. But Emma's response was different. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on him, processing what he had said. Then, to his surprise, she agreed. "I'll do it," she said simply. Ethan blinked, clearly unsure whether he had heard her correctly. He had expected some form of resistance, perhaps an argument, or at the very least, some form of negotiation. But Emma didn't flinch. She simply laid down her own conditions. "I won't quit my job," she said firmly, her voice calm but unwavering. "I won't change my routine. I won't become a trophy wife, paraded around at fancy events. If we do this, it's a formality, nothing more." Ethan's world was one of appearances, of people being molded to fit into the roles he assigned them. But Emma wasn't interested in playing that game. She wasn't interested in fitting into his carefully curated life. The coldness with which she spoke rattled him more than he could admit. He expected some form of emotional plea, or at least an attempt to bargain. But instead, she remained calm, detached, as though the entire situation meant very little to her. Ethan attempted to provoke her further, his pride pricking him with every word he spoke. He tried to insinuate that her world was much more complicated than she thought. But Emma quickly dismantled him with a single sentence. "You live in an ego bubble," she said. "A world where power and money are the only things that matter. But what have you really contributed beyond your fortune? What difference have you made?" Her words stung. Ethan had always prided himself on his achievements, his ability to control every situation, every conversation, and every business deal. But here was this woman he had never thought to even notice, standing in front of him, challenging everything he believed in. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't irritation, it was something more unsettling. It was the realization that, for once, he had no answer to her question. When their conversation ended, and Emma turned to leave, Ethan watched her walk away with a new sense of respect. Not for her appearance, but for what she conveyed: strength, intelligence, and an absolute resistance to everything he had so effortlessly controlled in his life. As Emma left his office that day, Ethan realized that she was unlike any woman he had ever met. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was the one in control anymore. The following days after the meeting were a whirlwind for Ethan. Despite the fact that their marriage was to be little more than a formal agreement, something about Emma lingered in his mind. She had been completely indifferent to his wealth and power, two things that usually guaranteed his dominance in any situation. For the first time, Ethan found himself thinking about her when he wasn't supposed to. She wasn't the kind of woman who was swayed by expensive dinners, fancy cars, or high-profile events, and that irked him, more than he cared to admit. It was at one of his usual elite social events that Ethan's discomfort with Emma's indifference began to grow. He had invited her. Of course, the marriage, after all, was part of the bet, and he wanted to show her off to his crowd, if only to prove that he could conquer even someone like her. He imagined that she would be out of place, awkward in her plain attire, uncomfortable in a room full of the world's wealthiest and most powerful people. He even expected her to show some sign of unease, maybe even a sense of inadequacy. But when Emma entered the ballroom, she was nothing like he expected. She was calm, poised, and completely unfazed by the luxury that surrounded them. Instead of shrinking in the presence of the glittering jewels, the designer gowns, and the expensive champagne, Emma seemed to effortlessly command the room. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there to flirt or to seek approval. She stood in the midst of the most exclusive crowd. And somehow, she made the environment work for her. Her unassuming elegance was striking. And the deeper Ethan looked, the more he realized that Emma was holding her own better than anyone in that room. As the evening wore on, Emma's conversations shifted from shallow small talk to passionate discussions about social issues, about education, sustainability, and social impact. The wealthy businessmen who had previously been content with their superficial chats about investments were now completely captivated by Emma's sharp intellect. They found themselves suddenly interested in subjects they had never considered important. Emma wasn't just talking, she was challenging everyone around her, questioning the status quo with a precision and force that made Ethan uncomfortable in ways he couldn't explain. The guests who had once fawned over him were now hanging on her every word. Ethan had always been the center of attention at these events. It was his world. He was used to being admired, to the whispers of awe as he entered the room. But tonight, it was different. As he watched Emma dominate the conversation with ease, he began to feel a strange pull toward her, not just her appearance, but her ideas, her values, and the authenticity she exuded. There was a power in her quiet resistance that Ethan couldn't ignore. It didn't take long before he realized that his initial thoughts about Emma, the thoughts that had convinced him to take on the bet in the first place, were shallow. He had underestimated her, thinking that he could win her over with his usual tools, charm, money, and influence. But Emma wasn't swayed by any of those things. She wasn't impressed by wealth. And she certainly didn't see power as a measure of worth. She saw right through it all. In the middle of the evening, as Ethan watched Emma continue to captivate the crowd, he felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just admiration, though that was part of it. It was something deeper. Ethan realized that his attraction to Emma wasn't just physical. It was intellectual. She was challenging him in ways that no one ever had before, making him question his life's purpose. Later, in the quiet of his office, Ethan found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man he saw. He wasn't the same person who had once built his empire by swallowing up competitors and accumulating wealth for the sake of wealth. He wasn't the man who had sought approval from everyone around him. Emma had awakened something in him. Something that he had buried under years of ambition and ego. It was at that moment that the real challenge hit him. He wasn't just playing a game anymore. His life, his choices, and everything he had built were now on the line. Emma had given him a glimpse of something real, something meaningful, and for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure if he was capable of embracing it, or even if he wanted to. But one thing was certain, the old Ethan Walker was no longer enough. The man who had once believed that success was defined by money and power was beginning to understand that there was more to life than simply winning. Emma had shown him a different path, one that he had never considered. And now, whether he liked it or not, his world was changing, and with it, so was he. As time went on, Ethan continued to change in ways he never imagined possible. The business deals, once the heartbeat of his existence, began to feel hollow. What mattered now were the social projects, the impact he could have on real lives, and the relationships he built with people who didn't care about his wealth. Emma, the woman he had once seen as a challenge, had become something far more significant in his life. A partner. A force that pushed him to confront his own values and beliefs. Though the road was not easy, Ethan's transformation was undeniable. He stopped seeing the world through the lens of profit and power, and began focusing on sustainability, education, and real social change. He invested in initiatives that aligned with Emma's vision, and together, they built something that would leave a lasting legacy. The Davis Foundation, a project born from personal redemption and a desire to make the world better, became a beacon of hope for countless communities. It wasn't just about the empire anymore. Ethan had come to realize that true success wasn't measured by bank accounts or acquisitions, but by the difference one could make in the world. Emma's unwavering conviction and quiet strength had taught him that. And in her, Ethan found not only the love he had never expected, but the purpose he had spent his entire life searching for. If you've enjoyed this journey and the profound changes Ethan and Emma experienced, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful life stories and lessons. You won't want to miss the next chapter. Thank you for watching.